Please be advised, you should be 16 years or older to listen to this chapter. It contains scenes of violence and evisceration. If that isn't your thing, there is no shame in missing out on one chapter. Strings of Malice, Book 1. Snowflake in an Alley. An Old Mother Nonsense Story. Chapter 13. Into the Wynbrook Woods. Brickdal, first Slarit. A week and a day after leaving Monkakus, no one could deny any more that something simply wasn't right. The trees on either side of the path the small company travelled on had not turned sunset as they ought to have by this time of year. Instead, they hung limp and oily from blackened branches that seemed entirely intent on reaching over the road to block out the sun during the day. Only Lunrith and Nimue seemed to have noticed the more worrisome signs at first. Tracks and ditches in their path told tales of entire caravans being attacked by something strong enough to then drag every carcass off into the dark trees. They had said nothing up to this point, a silent agreement between them to keep the others calm as the doctor had fallen ill on their 4th day out. His skin had turned ashen, and his hound had been acting up. It was never a good sign when animals became so agitated. It had even refused to leave the cart point blank after the 6th day. Their current conundrum was one that put them all on edge. With the road being relatively straight, they had seen the situation before they had arrived at it. A thick, dead tree lay across the road, blocking their path. There was no chance of their little caravan getting over it, and their options were few. Go around or go through. Neither Lunrith nor Nimue liked the idea of venturing off the path, and it smelled too much like bandits for them to be completely comfortable stopping to deal with the tree. Among the 4 of them, only 2 were any good in a fight, and their negotiator was not in top shape. "I don't like it," Nimue muttered. Lunrith sighed silently, while the hound was shaking between them. They should plan their way out of this as quickly as possible. "If this is an ambush, we are screwed." Lunrith nodded and gestured back into the caravan. Yes, fine," the woman huffed before her gaze turned steely and determined. "Irinka can keep a lookout, and we'll see what we can do. But we go around if it can't be moved." Lunrith quickly agreed. It was a good plan, at least as good as it was going to get in their current circumstances. At least it would have been, if bandits had been the problem. Nimue had revealed a shield from a bracelet she had tucked snug about her forearm, and a rather nasty-looking axe with a blade of green glass from beneath the delicates in her suitcase. The shield had made Lunrith tense. Green and copper. He knew those colours, and the stylized lizard entwined with the symbol of Cathor told him there was certainly more to this woman's story than the doctor had first revealed. Now, however, was not the time. The tree had been dead, to the point that simply prodding it with a finger caused the bark to disintegrate like ancient paper. But the vines, dark and limp as they were alive. They screamed when the 2 started hacking away at them and lashed out dangerously. Nimue's cheek bled red, a stark colour contrast to the monotonous grey around them, and then Irinka shrieked when the foliage went for the caravan. The doctor shouted weakly in fear as a vine slithered inside and wrapped around his leg. It dragged him out and started pulling him off the road towards the dead tree. His faithful hound's jaws freed him when it bit and ripped through the thing. The mouse helped him to his feet and out of the way as more lashed out for the horses. The poor things never stood a chance. They were dragged towards a large opening the vines had made inside the tree. Thinking quickly, Nimue had hurried them all off the road and into the forest, while the possessed foliage was distracted with its prey. They didn't stop running, even when the terrified shrieks of the horses had died down, and the sound of snapping bones could no longer be heard through the dense underbrush. Lunrith scouted their path for any more vines. They hacked, slashed, and dodged as they ran, but the sappy wisps appeared to give up the chase a few meters from the road itself. Though that didn't make the 4 feel any better, and they only stopped when they emerged in a small clearing. The group huddled together, Irinka holding up the doctor, who was barely able to stand, while Nimue faced the way of the known threat, and Lunrith kept his eyes on the dark tree line to their backs. It was a tense few minutes before they felt safe enough to half drop their guards, and Lanrith found Nimu's eyes lingering over his swords in confusion. She must have had the same thoughts he did, that their blades were made from the same stuff and one of a kind. Well, two in his case, but she left well enough alone when Dr. Gascaris collapsed to the ground and Irinka panicked. The man wasn't looking good, not even after Lanrith had returned from his short excursion for firewood. It was growing darker, night setting in far earlier than it had any right to, but he would be damned if they were to be without protection. Nimu was cursing up a storm in a tongue Lanrith had not heard in a long time, as she tried to treat the man with nothing more than what she'd had on her when they abandoned their things, and a small bag Irinka had had the wherewithal to grab on her swift exit from the caravan. Clever little mouse. Lanrith recruited her to help him clear a large circle around them, and place the wood before trapping them in a ring of low fire. They couldn't go on with the doctor in such bad shape, but maybe they might be safe while they tried to figure it out.
What's wrong with him?
Irinka fretted to Nimu once Lanrith had released her. Something is draining his magic, the woman muttered, wiping her bloody hands on a rag she had torn from the bottom of her travelling tunic. He was hurt years ago, really badly. Recruited to the war effort in Congo and got himself blown up for his efforts. Long story short, if it weren't for his magic holding him together, he would have died. Not all of his injuries could be completely healed, and with his magic being pulled out, he's relapsed.
Are you sure?
The girl asked worriedly.
How do you know his magic is being taken?
Nimu looked up at the girl with a grim expression. Because mine is too. I can't heal him. She held up a hand and it glowed ever so faintly. Irinka could see it being pulled off from the woman's skin if she looked closely enough. It's not a good situation.
What do we do?
Irinka asked softly, clearly scared of their situation and for her friend. Lanrith came over and touched her shoulder gently. He offered her what he could of a smile, and pointed to the symbol on Nimu's shield. She looked confused as the woman raised an eyebrow at the man, but then a faint smile slipped onto her face, and Nimu nodded. You're right. Keep a lookout while I pray. Lanrith tucked Irinka next to the doctor before taking guard around the inside of their ring. There was no telling how long this may take, but he'd be double damned if it was interrupted. They had to restoke the flames twice, before Nimu came out of the trance she had put herself in to contact the deity whose symbol she carried. She must have been incredibly powerful, if this was the way she prayed. But she stood with a renewed vigor and a plan. They needed to keep the fire and head due west towards the mountains. The horrors in this wood were fast and unnatural. The vines crowded all main roads and they should avoid them. If they could find the river, they would be all right. Apparently the creatures didn't like running water, but they weren't demonic. Not entirely anyway. On their way to it, but not quite all the way just yet. As per usual, this was all up to interpretation. The gods did love to speak in cryptic messages for their own amusement, but Nimu was rather secure in her interpretation. The only vision she had not been able to make heads or tails of was a white flower. She claimed that it had featured quite prominently, though its purpose remained a mystery. They never did find the river. Slow as their small company was, they were easily hunted by the deformed horrorlings that had appeared in the woods. As they moved through the forest, they could hear a pack of large somethings following and then approaching. Whatever the beasts, they didn't bother with stalking. They could scent their prey grow more panicked by their approach, and too slow to do anything about it. This spurred on a relentless chase. Irinka saw them first, her eyesight surprisingly good in the darkness of shadows, and horrors they were. One got around in front of them and dropped from an overhanging branch which announced its presence with an agonizing groan at the weight. It nearly landed on Nimu, who had been leading the charge, grabbing at her with hooked feet and howling when her axe effortlessly removed one at the second elbow joint. Lanrith all but threw the doctor at his sister just in time to be pinned by another, managing to grasp at the two protruding mandibles before they came down on his head. A long, serpentine tongue licked hungrily at his face before he could get his legs under it, and kick the creature off. It teetered on its thick tail, limbs flailing before falling forward again, but the man had managed to roll to his feet and pull out his swords. He shoved one into Irinka's hands before going back after the creature. The mouse fumbled with the weapon, too big for her, but managed to get the blade between herself and another creature as it lunged at her. She had not expected the blade to slice like butter through tough muscle, and its 4 beady eyes blinked at her in surprise, before it collapsed, pinning her legs beneath its bulk that had not been separated. She pushed at it with all her might, but the great corpse wouldn't move, and she panicked when she saw another one inching along a branch above them, preparing to drop down onto the defenseless doctor, whose hound was crouched over the man protectively, yet could only whimper, utterly terrified.
Doctor, you need to move!
Irinka shouted, grabbing the thing's attention only for it to jump at her. She tucked herself in between the jaws of the one she'd killed and screamed, but so did her attacker, as it was knocked clean out of the air and shoved onto its back. The jagged plates of its spine acted as pikes as it was pinned to the ground, and an enormous man crushed its head into nothing, with a hammer whose head was about the size of the girl's.
Burnt, watch your 8!
An unfamiliar female voice called out, and a spear flew through the air to impale one creature through its head as it sneaked up on the mysterious man. It reared back, screaming in pain, until Burnt swung his hammer again, and a loud crack thundered as its neck was broken in that single swing. Nimue appeared beside Irinka and slashed her axe at one that had sneaked up on the other side. It had clearly learned and backed away, but made an ungodly sound at her in return.
I'm stuck!
The mouse called out to her, but the woman was already stepping over the carcass and backing away the one who'd dared to approach her. "Cut yourself loose, girl," the woman shouted back. "Lunriths, on your 3! Irinka heard a loud thump, and then a sickly squelching noise from somewhere she couldn't see, and she grabbed the sword from where she had dropped it. Desperately, she began hacking at the dead creature on top of her. "Where the bloody hell is Thrissy?" The man, Burnt, strained deeply, sounding under pressure before another shriek and a thump. "That still counts as mine, pretty boy," the voice harumphed angrily, and Irinka managed to pull herself up enough to see the big man waving an accusatory fist at Lunrith, who had apparently cut off a creature's tail as a distraction, and it now lay between them with its head turned entirely the wrong way around on its neck. Lunrith shrugged and tossed the spear to a short woman who had been wailing on another creature with a shield, the colors indistinguishable in the dark besides the maroon ooze that seemed to substitute the blood of these infernal things. She caught the weapon without looking and plunged it deep into the creature's skull, before falling back towards the prone doctor. Nimue finished off her monster by managing to slip up under the thing's long forelegs and bringing her axe down on its neck. The head dropped and rolled down the shallow incline of the undergrowth, but it only led to more eyes watching them than they had already encountered. "Jane, I swear if she's off talking to damn trees again, I'm gonna kill her," the large man growled, stepping into the circle his companions had started and got ready to face off the others coming. Nimue and Lunrith took up the other 2 cardinal points, and Irinka passed the sword back to her brother as she slipped inside the circle to crouch over the doctor without flick.
Yeah, this morning you were begging for some action, and now you got it. You're moaning.
The woman drawled in return. Closer now, Irinka could see she was far older than her prowess would have anyone believe at a surface glance.
Make up your damn mind, would ya?
The creatures closed in, and the hound curled around the mouse, tucking its face away in her chest, utterly terrified. Irinka held Elflick close, and almost closed her eyes too, waiting for the inevitable. But then she saw movement. In the shadows the trees cast in the foliage, vines were slithering and creeping. Then, as though they knew they had been spotted, they lashed out lightning fast, curling and tightening around the creatures that had just been ready to pounce. The vines locked tightly, and the monsters shrieked as they were dragged back and away from the group. Irinka froze, eyes wide in terror as she watched them all lashed up to the trunk of whichever tree was nearest. The thorny tendrils pinned the flailing limbs, and the black oil they oozed helped them dive into either end of the creatures, until they forced open the hard exoskeleton of their chests, spilling their guts onto the ground below. Irinka had suspected the trees were dead, but it appeared not to be so. Instead, they came alive, as bark slithered down over the twitching creatures' forms and covered them, their visages still visible through the thin coating. The ones that managed to resist being split in half gagged and cried around the invasive tendrils, until the slithering bark flowed into every crevice, wound, and orifice, to cut off the vicious howls. A satisfied hum rippled through the forest, and all went still for good.
We need to get back to the grove.
The one called Jane muttered quietly. Irinka was terrified the woman's words might have broken some kind of spell, but the girl was quickly hoisted up to her feet before the big man, Burnt, scooped the doctor up and over his shoulder. "Can you two walk?" he gruffly asked Nimue and Lunrith. They both nodded, though it was evident that he had taken a few more wounds than she had. If Terra had not replaced the blood in her veins, the mouse might have registered that was the difference between trained skill and basic competency.
Quickly now, before more come crawling out of Nazis only knows where.
Jane hushed them as they started a quick pace west. It seemed as good as their luck would get, so they followed as quickly as they could.